If you ever hugged the wrong person, and they turned out to be the love of your life, would you thank fate or curse it forever? Emily Parker never imagined that one small, embarrassing accident would change everything. Her family, her dreams, and the walls she'd built around her heart. But on that rainy afternoon at JFK Airport, fate decided to trip her right into the arms of a man who would challenge every part of who she thought she was. Emily's shoes squeaked on the polished airport floor as she weaved between crowds of families, business travelers, and crying kids. She was late. Her brother Oliver was flying home from his first semester at college, and she had promised herself she'd be there when he stepped through the arrival gate. She rose on tiptoe, her eyes darting through the sea of rolling suitcases and hunched shoulders. Her heart skipped when she caught a glimpse of dark hair, broad shoulders, the same build as Oliver, the same leather jacket he used to wear. Without thinking, Emily pushed forward, slipping through a cluster of tourists. She barely registered the confused looks of people around her. "Oliver," she called out, her voice cracking with relief. But the man didn't turn. Maybe he didn't hear her. She broke into a half-run, and before her brain could catch up, her arms wrapped around his solid frame from behind. He smelled good, way too good for her brother. Expensive cologne, warm skin, a hint of something smoky. Emily froze. The stranger's muscles tensed under her hands. Slowly, he turned, and Emily felt her stomach drop. This man was definitely not her baby brother. He was taller, older, maybe late 20s, with perfectly styled hair and eyes that locked onto hers, like she'd just handed him a secret. His suit was tailored so well it looked like it belonged on a runway, not a crowded airport. Emily's mouth fell open. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought you were someone else." The man tilted his head, amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were sharp, the kind of gray that looked like a thunderstorm waiting to break. "Should I be flattered or concerned?" he asked, voice smooth as velvet. His smile was small, teasing, but his eyes didn't let go of her for a second. Emily stumbled back, her cheeks burning. "I was looking for my brother. He's about your height, and God, you don't care, do you? I'll just go." But before she could escape, a figure in a dark suit stepped forward. The guy was huge, built like a linebacker, and gave her a look that made her heart stutter. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" The bodyguard rumbled. Emily's eyes widened. Mr. Carter. Brian Carter. That name rang in her mind like an alarm bell. She'd seen it on the covers of Forbes, whispered about by customers in the cafe where she worked. Brian Carter, the elusive billionaire. The one who didn't do interviews, who avoided the spotlight like it was poison. And she just hugged him like he was family. She could barely squeak out a goodbye before spinning on her heel and disappearing back into the tide of travelers. But as she walked away, Emily could feel his eyes lingering on her back like an unspoken promise, or maybe a warning. You won't get away that easy. Emily wiped the same spot on the cafe counter for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The airport cafe was chaos as usual, families yelling, kids knocking over napkins, businessmen barking orders into their phones. She'd almost convinced herself the airport incident was just an embarrassing story she'd bury forever. But as the bells over the door jingled, her stomach dropped. He walked in. Gray eyes, perfectly cut suit, that same unreadable expression. Brian Carter. Right there in her little cafe. Emily ducked behind the coffee machine, hoping he'd order from anyone else. But when she peeked around, he was leaning casually on the counter, looking directly at her. "Hey, you're the hugger." Emily felt her face go red. "Please, can we not?" Emily, right? He'd never asked her name, but of course he knew it. Billionaires probably had secret Google chips in their heads. He gave her a lazy, devastating smile. "I was hoping to see you again." "Why?" she blurted. So you can tell your security guard to have me arrested for hugging in public." He chuckled, an actual laugh. It made her chest feel tight in a way she hated. "No arrests today. Just coffee, if you're the one making it." Emily's manager, Mr. Phillips, was already glaring at her from the back. She grabbed a cup, determined not to shake as she worked the machine. Brian leaned closer, watching every move. "Why do you work here?" he asked suddenly. She nearly spilled steamed milk all over the counter. "Because I like being yelled at for extra foam by people with too much money." He smirked. "So not for the perks?" She slammed the cup down in front of him. "Here, best latte you'll ever have. Now please go enjoy your billions somewhere else." Brian didn't move. He took a sip, eyes never leaving hers. "Interesting." "What?" she snapped. "You're not afraid of me. Everyone's always afraid of me." Emily crossed her arms, ignoring the flutter in her chest. "You're just a man with too much money and an army-sized security detail." A slow smile spread across his face. "And you're just a girl who hugs the wrong man." Her breath caught. She hated that he was right, and that part of her didn't want him to leave. Outside, planes thundered overhead, but all Emily could hear was the soft thud of her heart. Brian Carter, billionaire, untouchable, was sitting in her cafe, sipping coffee she'd made, looking at her like she was the most interesting puzzle he'd ever seen. And for the first time in years, Emily wondered if maybe, just maybe, her life wasn't as small and invisible as she'd always believed. Emily tried to keep her distance. After that day, she told herself Brian Carter would get bored and vanish. Rich people got bored easily, didn't they? But he didn't disappear. Every afternoon for the next week, Brian strolled into the cafe. Sometimes alone, sometimes with his mountain-sized bodyguard, but always with the same routine. He'd sit at the corner table, cross his legs, and watch her like she was his favorite TV show. And Emily hated how much she waited for that doorbell to ring. One rainy Thursday, the cafe was nearly empty when he walked in again. He looked tired this time, a hint of stubble along his jaw, hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. Emily pretended she didn't see him until he cleared his throat. "You're avoiding me," he said, voice low. She gave him a dry look. "Did you expect me to roll out a red carpet?" He smirked, that same infuriatingly calm expression. "No, but I did expect you to talk to me." Emily set down her towel, the edge of her apron brushing her knee, as she stepped closer. "Brian, you're a billionaire. Why on earth do you keep coming here?" He leaned back, studying her. The way his eyes searched her face made her feel like there was nowhere to hide. "Because you're the only person who looks me in the eye and sees me," he said softly. She blinked, thrown off by the honesty in his voice. "Don't you have friends? Or, I don't know, a family?" Brian's jaw tensed. "Family is complicated. So are friends. And you." He trailed off, but the way he looked at her made her heart stutter. Before Emily could respond, the door burst open and a gust of wind blew in her little brother Oliver, soaked from the rain, grinning like an idiot. Oliver called, shaking his wet hoodie out like a puppy. He froze when he saw Brian. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt your date." Emily shot him a death glare. "This is not a date. This is a man who won't take a hint." Brian laughed, the sound warm. He stood, extending a hand. "Brian Carter." Oliver's eyes went wide. "Holy crap. The Brian Carter? Did you buy the airport or something?" Emily groaned. "Oliver." But Brian just shook Oliver's hand, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Not yet. But if I do, I'll name a terminal after your sister." Oliver burst out laughing. "You're okay. For a billionaire." Emily's cheeks flamed as Oliver flopped onto a stool beside Brian, chatting like they'd been friends forever. Watching them, she felt something unfamiliar, a tiny spark of hope, and something that terrified her even more, the thought that maybe Brian Carter could fit into her life. Later that night, after the cafe closed, Emily and Oliver walked home together under her battered old umbrella. Oliver nudged her shoulder. "You like him?" She nearly tripped. "What? No. I tolerate him. You do that thing with your nose when you lie." Emily elbowed him, but he just grinned. You deserve good things. Maybe stop pushing them away." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't shake his words. As they turned onto their street, Emily glanced up at the sky, letting a few raindrops hit her face. Did she deserve good things? Or was she just setting herself up for heartbreak? The next day, Brian wasn't at the cafe. Or the day after that. Or the next. Emily told herself it didn't matter. She had bigger things to worry about. Rent was late again, Oliver's tuition was due, and the cafe owner was cutting her hours. But at night, when she lay awake listening to Oliver's soft snoring in the next room, she found herself wondering, where was Brian Carter? 1 week later, she found out. A letter arrived at the cafe for her. Cream envelope, expensive paper. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "Emily, if you want to have dinner with me, then you'll leave me no choice but to keep showing up at your cafe until you do. But I'd rather give you a choice Friday. 7 p.m. Casa Aurelia. The table by the window. Brian." Emily's heart stuttered. Casa Aurelia, one of the fanciest restaurants in the city. She imagined herself in her thrift store dress, tripping over waiters, embarrassing herself in front of crystal chandeliers. She was about to rip the letter up when Oliver snatched it from her hands. "Is this a date invite?" "Oliver." He grinned, eyes wide. "You're going." Friday night arrived faster than she'd hoped. Emily paced her tiny bedroom, a pile of clothes on her bed. She finally settled on a simple black dress she'd borrowed from her neighbor. Not exactly designer, but at least it didn't have a coffee stain. When she stepped into Casa Aurelia, her stomach flipped. The place was all gold accents and soft piano music, waiters gliding between tables like swans. She felt completely out of place. Then she saw him. Brian stood when he saw her, and for a moment, he just looked, really looked, like he was memorizing her. "You came," he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She cleared her throat, resisting the urge to bolt. "Don't make me regret it." He chuckled, gesturing for her to sit. For the next hour, they talked, about everything and nothing. He asked about Oliver, about her dreams. She asked about his travels, his favorite cities, his childhood, which he answered carefully, like there were doors he didn't want to open yet. But under the warm restaurant lights, Emily saw him not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a man, lonely, searching, real. After dessert, Brian reached into his pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "A small gift." She opened it, expecting jewelry or a check, but inside was a deed. The name at the top made her breath catch. "It's your parents' old restaurant," Brian said quietly. "I bought it back. For you." Emily's throat tightened. That restaurant was a childhood. Closed down after her parents went bankrupt. A loss that haunted her every day. "Brian, I can't take this," she whispered. "You can. You should. It was yours before it was ever mine." She felt tears prick at her eyes. She hated that he could do this, break down her walls with one act of kindness. And she hated even more that it made her want him in ways that terrified her. She pushed the envelope back across the table. "I can't be bought." Brian's eyes softened. "I'm not buying you, Emily. I'm giving you back what should have always been yours." The room blurred for a second as her tears finally fell. Brian reached across the table, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "Let me be the mistake you don't regret," he whispered. Emily couldn't sleep that night. The envelope with the deed lay on her nightstand, taunting her every time she turned over. She could almost hear her mother's voice. "This place was our dream, Em." A dream that bankruptcy and corporate buyouts had stolen from them. And now Brian Carter, the same man whose company had once destroyed the dream, was giving it back. Was this kindness or guilt? She squeezed her eyes shut, but the question spun circles in her mind. Outside, rain pattered against her bedroom window like the universe tapping its fingers, waiting for her to decide. Days blurred by in a haze of work and confusion. Emily kept the deed locked away, trying not to think about what accepting it would mean. She tried to focus on the cafe, on Oliver's next checkup, on keeping her life small and manageable, but Brian was like gravity. No matter how far she drifted, she always found herself pulled back to him. They texted odd hours. Sometimes he sent her photos of the sunrise from his penthouse. Sometimes she sent him silly selfies with Oliver, faces pressed together under a blanket fort. One night, her phone buzzed with a single line from Brian. "If I lost everything tomorrow, would you still hug me?" She didn't answer right away. She didn't know how. Then Oliver collapsed. It happened on a Wednesday morning. Emily had just returned from her shift when she heard a crash from the bathroom. She found Oliver on the floor, pale, shaking, eyes glazed with pain. "Em," he whispered, "it hurts." The next hours were a blur. Paramedics, sirens, cold hospital waiting rooms. Emily sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her phone buzzing with calls she didn't want to answer. The doctor's words rattled in her skull like a curse. Kidney failure. Emergency surgery. We need payment now. How could she save him? She had barely enough for rent, let alone tens of thousands for a specialist. She texted Brian once, then deleted it, heart hammering. She didn't want to owe him again. Didn't want to be just another problem for him to fix. But as the minutes dragged on, Oliver's face swam in her mind. Her sweet, goofy brother, who deserved every chance at life. She forced herself to breathe, then typed 2 words. "Please. Help." Brian arrived less than 30 minutes later, looking like he'd stepped out of a storm. His tie was crooked, hair damp, but his eyes were locked on her. "Where's he?" he asked. No greeting, no small talk. "They're prepping him for surgery," Emily said, voice shaking. "They need payment. I can't." Brian cut her off with a single touch to her shoulder. "Done. Don't worry about it." She wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't want his money, his power, his constant rescue. But the words tangled in her throat, because the truth was simple. She needed him. Oliver needed him. When the doctor came back with forms, Brian signed everything without flinching. His signature in thick ink felt like an anchor, pulling them back from the edge. Hours crawled by. Emily sat in a too small plastic chair, Brian beside her, their knees bumping when she shifted. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Why do you keep doing this?" Brian turned to look at her. His eyes were raw, stripped of their usual armor. "Because I want to. Because I can." "That's not an answer," she snapped, tears threatening. He leaned closer, elbows resting on his knees. "When I was younger, all I ever wanted was to build something no one could tear down. So I did. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to give without expecting anything back." He paused, eyes locking with hers. "You remind me." Emily wanted to scream that he didn't get to rewrite the past. He didn't get to fix things with money and a sad smile. But then she remembered Oliver on that cold bathroom floor, and her anger cracked into something softer, more painful. She laid her head on Brian's shoulder, just for a moment. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then his hand settled on her back, gentle, steady, a promise she wasn't ready to name yet. When surgeon finally stepped into the waiting room, Emily bolted upright. The procedure was successful, the doctor said, smiling. Relief flooded her body, so fast she almost collapsed. Brian caught her before she hit the floor. "Oliver going to be okay," she murmured against his chest. Brian didn't say "I told you so." He didn't say anything at all, just pressed his lips to the crown of her head, breathing her in like she was the only air he'd ever need. 2 days later, Oliver was stable and recovering. Emily should have felt at peace, but the storm inside her was far from over. She knew she needed to talk to Brian about the restaurant, about what all this meant, about what they were. She found him in the hospital corridor, staring out at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. "You can't keep fixing everything," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Brian turned, and the tired lines around his eyes made him look vulnerable in a way that terrified her. "I don't want to fix you, Emily. I just want to be here." "Why me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You could have anyone." He stepped closer, so close she felt his warmth seep into her chilled skin. "Because you never cared about what I have. Because you hugged me like I was human. You looked at me and saw a man, not a name, not a bank account." She didn't realize she was crying until he brushed his thumb across her cheek. "But you hurt me," she choked out. "Your company ruined my family. You gave it back, but that doesn't erase everything." Brian's hand fell away, his eyes darkening with regret. "No, it doesn't. And I'm sorry, Em. I'll be sorry every day. But I'm still here, if you'll have me." She stood there, torn between all the years she'd spent fighting to survive and the terrifying truth that maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to fight alone anymore. She took a shaky breath. Then she stepped forward, pressing her forehead to his chest, the same place her life had changed in a single mistaken hug. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. Brian's arms wrapped around her, warm and real. "We'll figure it out, together." And for the first time in her life, Emily believed him. A few weeks later, Emily stood in front of the old restaurant building that used to be her family's everything. The faded sign, the cracked windows, all ghosts of the life her parents had poured their dreams into. Now the keys rested in her pocket, warm, real, a second chance. She felt Brian's presence before she heard his voice. "You okay?" he asked softly, stepping up beside her. She turned to him, half a smile tugging at her lips. "Are you sure you want to do this? You, Mr. Billionaire, scrubbing floors and repainting walls with me?" Brian let out a low laugh, eyes crinkling. "It's your dream, Emily. That makes it mine too." Inside, they walked through the empty space together, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. They talked about plans, old recipes her mother had written in the margins of cookbooks, the way her dad used to hum as he chopped onions, how she wanted to see families filling the tables again. Brian squeezed her hand, and for a moment, all the fear slipped away. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about healing old wounds. They worked side by side, day after day. Brian surprised her every time. The man who once signed billion-dollar deals without blinking was now on his knees fixing tiles, paint streaking his hair, cursing when he hit his thumb with the hammer. Oliver helped too, his laugh echoing through the empty rooms as he teased Brian about his fancy hands. They ordered greasy takeout when they were too tired to cook, fell asleep on paint-stained tarps, and woke up to fresh ideas and coffee. Slowly, the broken pieces of Emily's life began to come together, like a mosaic more beautiful for all its cracks. But life wasn't done testing her yet. When the news of Emily and Brian's relationship hit the gossip sites, they were ruthless. Headline screamed, "Billionaire falls for airport waitress." And gold digger or Cinderella? At first, Emily tried to laugh it off. But every time she opened her phone, there was another photo of her. Grainy shots of her at work, of her hugging Brian, of her walking Oliver to the doctor. One night, she found herself curled on the floor of the restaurant kitchen, her phone screen flickering in the dark. Brian found her there, eyes puffy, shoulders shaking. "Emily," he whispered, kneeling in front of her. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I don't belong in your world, Brian. I never will." His hands cupped her cheeks, warm and steady. "You're not in my world, Emily. We're building a new one, ours. Don't you see that?" She looked at him through tears, searching his eyes for doubt. But there was none. Only that quiet certainty that made her believe they could survive anything, if they did it together. The grand opening of Parker's, her parents' old name for the restaurant, came on a clear spring evening. Fairy lights strung along the windows, laughter spilling out onto the street. Oliver stood by the door, greeting guests with his signature crooked grin. Emily worked the floor in her mother's old apron, greeting neighbors who remembered her as a little girl who used to sneak cookies from the kitchen. Brian, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, carried trays like a pro, cracking jokes with customers, wiping sweat from his brow like he'd done this all his life. Halfway through the night, Emily slipped out to the small balcony overlooking the city. She leaned against the railing, eyes stinging with happy tears. She had fought so hard to keep her world small, safe, invisible. But standing here, hearing laughter and clinking glasses below, she finally understood something. She wasn't meant to stay small. Brian found her there, slipping his arms around her waist. "Careful," he teased, voice husky against her ear. "People might think you're falling for me all over again." She laughed, pressing her back against his chest. "I already did that the day I hugged the wrong man." He turned her to face him, eyes searching hers. "Emily Parker, you changed my life in ways I never saw coming." "You changed mine too," she whispered. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. "So, marry me?" She blinked. "Brian, you already asked me." "Yeah, but you deserve to hear it again. Every day if you want." Her heart raced. She could see it now. A future she'd never dared to want. Laughter and arguments, burnt toast and slow dances in the kitchen, fighting and making up forever. "Yes," she said, tears slipping free. 1,000 times yes. They got married 6 months later, in a small garden behind the restaurant. Just family and close friends, flowers picked from the local market, fairy lights strung through the trees. Oliver walked Emily down the aisle, beaming like he'd just won the lottery. When Brian saw her, he looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. "I used to think you were my biggest mistake," Emily whispered during their vows, voice trembling. "But hugging you, hugging the wrong man, was the best thing I ever did." Brian laughed, eyes glassy. "Well, for the record, it was the best ambush hug I've ever received." They danced under the stars that night, her bare feet on his polished shoes, the world quiet except for the music of their laughter. And when Emily looked at him, really looked, she saw not a billionaire or a man with a complicated past. She saw Brian hers, and she knew, deep in her bones, that no amount of mistakes could ever break what they'd built together. Sometimes life hands you your greatest blessing disguised as your biggest embarrassment. Sometimes you hug the wrong man, and he turns out to be exactly right. So if you're out there wondering if your mistakes define you, remember Emily and Brian. Sometimes it's the imperfect, unexpected moments that lead you exactly where you were meant to be. Did you love Emily and Brian's story? Leave a comment below and tell us. Have you ever made a mistake that changed your life forever? Drop your answers And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that might just change your heart. Click here to watch another story that will restore your faith in second chances.